So as a child, I was really healthy, happy, just a typical child basically, and there was no sign of anything out of the norm basically. I just was a normal child. And what actually happened was when I got to the age of 3, I think I was at this point, my parents actually noticed a lump on my spine and they wanted to get it checked out because obviously this just wasn't a normal thing. It wasn't like I had just chicken pox or something that would just go. It was something that was very different. So of course they were concerned and took me to the doctors to get it checked out, and for a while basically nothing happened. They said it was nothing to worry about and nothing of concern, and that it would probably just go down and that it might just be something to do with me growing as a child. So yeah, nothing was of concern and nothing was bad at this point. So that went on for a few months I believe, and the lump didn't go down, it was still there, and I think it was just growing in size and just didn't look normal. It wasn't just a typical lump. So they kept taking me back to the doctors, and eventually, I think it was after around 4 months maybe, I'm not exactly sure because obviously I was young, I don't exactly remember this point, but in September 2003 I eventually got a diagnosis, and this was after I went to the doctors and they sent me for an MRI scan, which, can I just say, I hate to this day. If you've ever been in one, you'll know what they're like, but they're the most claustrophobic things and I hate them. Like, they're horrible. You basically have to lie flat on a thin, narrow bed, and then it slides you into this big, like, polo shaped dome, and your whole body is covered by this magnetic dome, and it takes images of inside you basically. It's basically like a big X-ray. It's just not really pleasant, it's really claustrophobic and just really uncomfortable, so yeah, I still don't really like those. But that basically gave us a diagnosis, and after the doctors looked at the MRI scan, they sent me straight up to Bristol Children's Hospital to get a biopsy because they wanted to find out what it was. And this is basically where everything went downhill. So during that biopsy, basically what happens is they take a sample of tissue. So they basically took a sample of where the lump was, which was actually on my spine. It was in the middle of my spine. And yeah, it basically didn't really go to plan. And I ended up being paralysed from the waist down. And that was not the only thing. Like, that was the aftermath. But the actual lump they found was a fibrosarcoma tumour, which is basically a cancerous tumour. So not only was I now paralysed, I also had to deal with the treatment that came with cancer and getting rid of that. So I was very ill after this biopsy, and my spine actually collapsed, so it had to be pinned back together with spinal rods, which are still in my spine now. So once we actually had this diagnosis and knew what was going on, we then had to focus on the actual treatment process. So I was actually given 4 months of intensive chemotherapy and also 30 sessions of radiotherapy. And if you don't know what these are, chemotherapy is basically a really intense drug treatment, and it makes all of your hair fall out, which is what happened to me, which was obviously devastating at the time. I feel like you don't appreciate your hair until it's not there, and it makes you really sick. I was just physically being sick all the time. I couldn't keep anything down, which is why I then also had to have a nose tube to feed me, which was honestly the worst thing ever. I still remember the actual, what it felt like, the feeling of it going through your nose, down your throat, making you gag every time it went down, and just feeling it go all the way down to your stomach. It was the worst feeling ever. So both these treatments are supposed to reduce the actual tumour size, which eventually they did, and thankfully it got rid of the tumour completely, and touch wood, it hasn't actually came back since. However, the actual most significant thing that has happened since is that I actually developed scoliosis as a result, which is basically a curvature of the spine, and a lot of people actually suffer with this. But because I had my rods put in at such a young age, and my spine grew a lot since then, and just my whole body grew, it made my spine just completely bend. So although I no longer actually have the cancer, the after effects are still existent. So once the tumour had actually gone down, I obviously then had to focus on actually making myself independent again, because I was no longer able to walk. I walked into the hospital but never walked out again. A lot of physio was needed. I was basically just starting to sit up again. I literally couldn't even sit up. So if you are going through something at the moment that is similar to this, just believe that you can get through it, because honestly you can. If you are determined and if you seek the positives out of the many negatives, you can definitely achieve and succeed. Just appreciate the life that you've got, live your dreams,